Well, surprise move this morning, wasn't it? Because Restore Britain's Rupert Lowe offered Reform UK an olive branch, or what some people would call an olive branch, to work together to build a future patriotic government.
That is why today I'm reaching out to put personalities and our past disagreements aside for the good of the country.
Well, Mr Lowe said he would only agree to a pact if Nigel Farage agreed to 5 policies.
Well, there you go. This is GB News Originals. I'm Emily Carver. Please do give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And do leave a comment. Let me know what you think.
Including mass deportations, a ban on the burqa and a referendum on the death penalty. He also said that future, I think, current Tory party ministers or former ministers would not be allowed to serve in a future government. Reform's Andrew Rosendale spoke to GB News earlier today.
Rupert was elected as a Reform UK MP under Nigel's leadership, so clearly there's common ground on lots of issues.
Well, Nigel Farage has responded tonight. He said this: "To deliver change, I understand Reform UK will need the support of people from other parties, as well as millions who have never voted before. That is a broad coalition I am building." So, should Reform be more open to uniting the right and accepting, perhaps, Restore's offer? Well, I'm now joined by commentator and YouTube sensation Bruce Unfiltered, and another sensation, political commentator Lee Harris. Good evening, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you both on at the same time. Look, Bruce, I'll start with you. What do you think of this offer from Rupert Lowe to Nigel Farage, or from Restore Britain to Reform UK?
I think Alex, I made my points very clear on social media earlier today that it felt to me a little bit like very closely after the Manchester election, they probably didn't perform quite as well as they wanted to, picking up, 46,000 votes out of a potential 2.1 million, which is another conversation for another day because the vote count or the people that turned out was terrible. But I do think after Makerfield, after the Manchester by-election and possibly other elections that have taken place, they've kind of realised that they're not the political force social media made them to be, and that they might be struggling and they need to form some sort of coalition to effectively what Lowe said today, unite the right, which they didn't seem too interested in for the past sort of 6 to 8 months. So I did find it a little bit odd today, to be perfectly honest. And it seemed like a list of demands more than we need to unite under one banner.
Yeah, so you're a little bit suspicious of it, if I'm right in saying that, Bruce. Now, Lee, you think there's a good chance that we can unite the right. Do you think that there should be some negotiation between the two parties?
Well, I think, to start with, I think what Rupert did today was actually quite a good move. You're absolutely right to be suspicious of it. I don't disagree with anything that Bruce has just said. But I think what's happened is what we've seen is we're having a slightly different conversation that we had 24 hours ago. And what I've seen in comments on X and people responding to Nigel's response is all of a sudden we've got Restore voters talking about doing a deal or working with Reform to unite the right, and that has changed the tone of the debate. Now, it doesn't really matter to me what Rupert's intentions were, and I'm perfectly sure there's some clever politics behind it in his mind as well, but I also think it shows a little bit of weakness to Rupert Lowe as well. But what he's doing, I think, is he's changed the debate, and I was quite shocked, I have to admit, because like Bruce just said, it wasn't that long ago that Rupert Lowe was saying that Nigel Farage could never be Prime Minister. And now we've got an about turn. Now, I'm very happy with that. I'm a person that likes to kind of straddle both sides a little bit. Now, I believe Reform is probably the best vehicle that we have to win the next election. But I also understand that you have to take the political landscape as we see it. Now, the political landscape as we see it includes Restore, whether we like it or not. And let's just say Nigel would come out today with a harsh rejection to say, this is utterly ludicrous, insulted Restore voters. He could have handled this a lot worse than he did. I was actually pleasantly surprised with Nigel Farage's response. I've seen some people say it's a bit weak and but I think it kind of needed to be, because what I didn't want to see above all else was Nigel to come out of the blocks, insult Restore voters, insult this potential public olive branch, but he's dealt with it, I think, with an element of restraint and an element of respect, which is what I like.
Farage breaks his silence. Lowe offers peace. But is British politics about to fracture for good? There is a war going on inside the British right, And tonight, it just took a turn nobody saw coming. A man once cast aside, a leader who refuses to look back, and a peace offer that might be the most calculated move in modern political history. Welcome back to Britain Underneath, the channel that pulls the curtain back on the stories Westminster does not want you thinking too hard about. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you are about to hear tonight is the kind of story that gets buried by lunchtime tomorrow, and we are the ones who dig it back up. Let's dive straight into it. For 18 months, two men who once stood shoulder to shoulder have been tearing chunks out of each other in public. Nigel Farage, the man who has rebuilt and reshaped British politics more times than most journalists can count, and Rupert Lowe, the former Reform UK MP who walked away, or, depending who you ask, was pushed, after a bust-up so dramatic it still gets whispered about in Westminster corridors. Lowe went on to found his own outfit, Restore Britain, and ever since, the story has been simple. Two patriots, one movement, torn apart. But tonight, something shifted. Rupert Lowe has extended what he is calling a peace pact. Not quite an apology, not quite a surrender, but something close to an olive branch, held out toward the man he has spent a year and a half publicly opposing. And Nigel Farage, for the first time, has broken his silence to respond.
Before we get into what was actually said, and trust me, the wording here matters more than you think. If you are new to this channel, this is exactly the kind of story we specialise in. Not the headline, the story underneath the headline. So if you want more of this, go ahead and subscribe to Britain Underneath now, because we are about to unpack every layer of what just happened between these two men. Let's start with Lowe. In his statement, he said something rather striking. He said, millions of people now see a patriotic right hopelessly divided. Read that again. That is not a man gloating. That is a man acknowledging failure, at least publicly. And it is worth asking why now? Why, after 18 months of open hostility, would Rupert Lowe suddenly extend a hand toward the very man he built an entire movement in opposition to?
Yeah, I think I was actually quite surprised to see Nigel Farage respond to it, I have to admit. Bruce, in terms of all of this negotiation, I think you pointed out something at the start of this. Rupert Lowe has basically put out some red lines. He's made a demand. I think some of the red lines on policies could be quite easily got over the line by Reform and Restore voters on both sides. But there is something there that I think actually might be a red line for Reform, which is saying, actually, people like Robert Jenrick, Andrew Rosendale, Danny Kruger, who else am I missing? Suella Braverman would not be allowed to serve in a ministerial position in a future government. What's your take on the negotiation stance here?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? The question, Alex, and as well, I convey with what Lee said there, with quite a lot of it. I do like how this has played out across social media today. But going back to your point, I like Suella Braverman, and from the earliest points of Restore coming, I'd always maintained, which is something that staunchly I think Restore voters have been against, is there would be an inception or there would be a recruitment of Conservative MPs, provided they align with Reform UK policy. I think Braverman, Kruger, Jenrick, Anderson, we could all say do. They fundamentally align with the policy that Reform have got. If people have actually bothered to read it, I do think that Reform's immigration policy is very, very similar to Restore Britain's. I think when we're talking politically, is the death penalty that important? Is the ban of halal and kosher meat that important? When we're talking about subjects like net zero, national security, education, technology, the economy, we have to look at the bigger picture here. And I think the question has to be is, what do Restore actually bring to the table with regard to their candidates, with regard to where they sit in constituencies, with regard to how much are they putting on the table, and what have Reform got to, accept, and what are they giving? Because as much as people want to say Restore have, and I will not deny this, they have made a political explosion. Let's not beat about the bush with that one. They exploded on the scene, got a massive member base very quickly. Their social media went through the roof. I think I'd maintained for the longest period of time that that would not necessarily translate into electoral voting, because politics is very different to social media. I think we can all agree on that. And I think that's being demonstrated. And I go back to my original point where I think maybe they're getting to a point where they're not necessarily getting I don't know what their funding situation is, but it's starting to cost them money. They're starting to front people up, and they're not really making the gains I think they wanted to. I think they're starting to, and trust me, I fully endorse the unite of the right, the unification of the right, because it's something I've maintained since 2022 on social media. I picked reform as my flag, and I wanted people to unite under that banner against this establishment, and particularly a Labour government.
This is the thing, Bruce, and I'll put this back over to you, Lee, because this is the thing.
Well, the timing tells its own story. This olive branch arrives just days after the Greater Manchester mayoral election, where Restore Britain finished behind Labour, Reform and the Greens, and, most tellingly, ahead of the Conservatives, but only barely, and nowhere near where Lowe would have hoped. In a nationally overlooked by-election, Restore Britain pulled in just 8.7%. Not the surge Lowe needed, not the validation his movement was built on. And in politics, when the numbers do not move, sometimes the strategy has to. He wants a referendum on the death penalty. He wants what he describes as a self-sufficient Britain restored. And he wants faith in politics rebuilt from the ground up. Bold demands. The kind of demands that sound less like an invitation to reconcile and more like a test. A test to see whether Nigel Farage is willing to bend toward Lowe's vision, or whether Farage will do what Farage has always done, which is set his own terms and dare everyone else to follow. Now, quick pause here. If you are enjoying how we are laying this out piece by piece, the way it actually unfolded rather than just throwing headlines at you, that is the entire point of Britain Underneath. So take a second, hit subscribe, and let's keep going, because Farage's response is where this story really gets interesting. Nigel Farage did not ignore the peace pact. He did not dismiss it either. Instead, he did something far more strategic. He responded with warmth wrapped around steel. He said, and this is worth hearing carefully, that patriotic voters believe in many of the same things, but only one party truly has the possibility of delivering change. Read between the lines there. That is not rejection. But it is not full acceptance either. That is Nigel Farage saying, "Come to me," not the other way around. He went further, acknowledging that to deliver real change, Reform UK will need support from people across other parties, and crucially, from millions who have never voted before. He called it the broad coalition he is building. And then came the line that will likely define this entire saga going forward. He said he has always been prepared to put country before party, just as he did back in 2019 when he stood Reform candidates down to help deliver Brexit. But then he added firmly, "I will never turn my back on my team." That single sentence tells you everything about how Farage is playing this. He is not slamming the door on Lowe. He is not welcoming him back with open arms either. He is doing what Nigel Farage has always done best, holding the centre of gravity and letting everyone else orbit around him.
Reform and Restore did a pact together. Could that alienate the Tories? Because actually what is likely to happen if we're looking at the landscape of things, let's assume there might be a snap general election, which I think is coming sooner rather than later. Essentially what you'd need at this point in time would be a hung parliament. You'd need Reform and the Tories to work together. Could it show some weakness if Reform are willing to do a pact now with a much smaller party?
It depends on how they deliver that. I think prior to the election, I think most parties, we're all quite used to this, watching politics over the years. They're not going to openly say they're going to do any deals way before an election. They're going to rightly, try and keep their voter base and not sort of show weakness too early before an election. I think each part, what I want to see, and I think this is the biggest point that's come out of today, is pragmatism. And I think we have seen a little bit of pragmatism from both Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage today. That's, for me, is the biggest takeaway from today. And you look at the red lines, you know, going back to the red lines that you were talking about earlier, there are no red lines in politics. I mean, I cringed at a couple of those red lines myself. I kind of imagine Nigel Farage reading them and thinking, but look, if I'm going to go into a negotiation, I run my own business. I know you're familiar with this, Alex, as well. If you're going to go into negotiation, you start at your red lines and then you talk afterwards. And I think that what we've seen today is the hope that I had all along, because I think, you know, if you would ask me this question 48 hours ago, do I think that Restore would ever work with Reform? Do I think that Reform may well, you know, need the help of the Tories? Would that work? All of that was very cloudy in my head, and quite depressingly, I did not think that it was ever going to work between Rupert and Nigel. I think that's changed today. Whether that was Rupert's intention or not, we have seen Restore voters and Restore supporters on X talking about working with Reform. This is such a massive step. I'm trying to be optimistic about this.
Yeah, no, I respect it.
Can I interject there, Lee? Because I think that narrative has existed for the longest period of time. A lot of the people that follow me who support Restore still have always maintained that they would vote for who they thought was going to win. So I think that amongst the largest part of Restore's voter base, they already kind of understand that, you know, we've got to do the thing that's right for the country, and that sometimes might be saying, look, I'm going to swallow my pride a little bit and put an X in a box, even though I still support Restore Britain. I'll do what needs to be done for the betterment of the country.
What I would say back to that, it's not in disagreement in any way, but it's, if you think about what Reform could. Oh, no, I got it right the first time. If you think about what Restore...
But not everyone around Farage was quite so diplomatic. Gawain Towler, who sits on Reform UK's board and has been one of Farage's closest allies for years, was far blunter. He accused Lowe of chasing relevance, suggesting that Restore Britain simply is not gaining the traction Lowe hoped for. Towler's words were sharp. He described a 68-year-old man, twice elected on what he called the coattails of Nigel Farage, a man who spent 18 months declaring his purpose was Farage's downfall, now looking at an 8.7% result in a largely ignored by-election and concluding that this is his moment, now or never. That is not the language of reconciliation. That is the language of a camp that still feels betrayed and is not entirely convinced this peace pact is genuine.
Towler went even further, pointing out policy gaps that may be impossible to bridge, including Restore Britain's stance on banning kosher food, a position Towler made clear Farage would never accept. Which raises the real question hanging over this entire story. Can two political operations with genuinely different values ever truly merge, no matter how badly their voters might want them to? Because here is the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. Millions of people on the patriotic right of British politics are watching this unfold and feeling exactly what Lowe described, a movement that could be powerful, fractured by ego, timing, and old wounds that have not fully healed. Whether this peace pact leads anywhere real, or whether it quietly fades the way so many political truces do, is something only the next few months will reveal.
So take a breath. Sit with that for a second, because whatever side of this you land on, one thing is certain. British politics on the right is entering a defining moment, and how these two men handle the next few weeks could shape the next general election far more than either of them is willing to admit publicly. If you have made it this far, thank you for staying with us, genuinely. Stories like this deserve more than a headline and a scroll past. They deserve context, patience, and someone willing to lay it all out properly. That is what we do here at Britain Underneath, every single time. So if this kept you hooked, do us a favour. Hit subscribe, tap that notification bell, and stay informed with us. Because the next chapter of this story is coming, and you will not want to find out about it secondhand. We will see you in the next one.